I can only see like to the edge of, like I can see right here, right? And I can see those things in the background right there. But I do want you guys to be able to see this, like if you can't see me over here, like at least maybe the screen can provide another opportunity to, make your kids Okay. Okay. So I think I'm almost situated here. All right, so what we're going to work on right now is we're going to prep the zipper with this gusset. So the kind of part that makes the bag larger, so it expands, so it's just not a flat piece of, two fabrics sandwiched together, is going to be this gusset that we're putting here. So many of you will want a gusset to give some depth to your bag, like this side panel on the bag here, that's the gusset, so on and so forth. So the way that I did this before that seemed to work okay is that we're going to make kind of this little sandwich here of the gussets, this guy, the zipper, and the lining all together in one kind of sandwich. That way, when we fold this out like this, we'll get all these things situated correctly. When we fold the lining over to the back side, all of these things are ready to go, and then we can actually make this into the long edge that's going to sew around the perimeter of this. Okay, so I don't think we have that sample bag in here, but remember that that gusset goes all the way around the outside four edges of this, and that's how the bag works. Okay, so the instructions say, it's been a couple days since I've done this, place the right side of the zipper on the right side of the outer fabric. Line up the raw edge of the top of the zipper tape to the raw edge of the outer gusset piece. So in this case, we're doing right sides together of the zipper and the gusset for the moment. And I'm going to pin this just to have it. And at this point, because nothing's sewn, pretty much, I'm just going to pin the tape so that it's not like fanning out, like it's as wide as the gusset itself. It doesn't like open up at this top because there's a gap here, nothing to hold it in. If you have the longer zippers that you shortened, remember we measured an inch up from the top of the cam. Go ahead and line that mark up with the raw edge. Okay, so if you have the yellow or blue zippers, we measured an inch up from the top of the stop here, and then that's what you'll want to line up with the raw edge of the gusset here. Okay. So that only pertains to the yellow, like Sarah, like you've got, and that royal blue. Okay. So line up the raw edge of the top of the zipper tape with the raw edge of the gusset outer piece. Sandwich the outer gusset piece, zipper, and lining gusset piece as pictured. So here, let me think about this for 1 second. The lining, make sure I get this in the camera. So we have the zipper that's right sides together with the gusset piece, and then the lining shouldn't have a right side, wrong side really on any of these. It's going to touch the back side of the gusset like this. So it goes zipper, gusset, lining. And I think I'll be the guinea pig here and just double check. But that should work. It should be zipper, gusset, lining. And when we fold it open, we'll have the zipper, the gusset, and the lining ready to go. Okay. So one last time, right side of zipper to right side of gusset, and then the lining gets on there. So zipper, gusset, lining. Okay. All right, so the instructions say to sew off 1/4 inch. And so I'm going to use the machine. And I do still have those pins in there. But I'm just going to be really careful. They're vertical, so I can sew over the top of them, just go slow. I'm used to my machine that has the automatic cutter on it. I should count how many things fall today. That'll just be the first of many. All right, and so when we open this up, we should have, it should look like this, okay, where we have like the lining back here because this is going to cover the inside of that like weird texture of this bag fabric that we use. When we pull it open, we have a nice finished edge right here. And then this tab right here is actually serving the purpose of concealing that gap. So, this is kind of our sample bag. If we went into production, we'd figure out like how much we actually could move that up. But right now I'm a little worried about the overall length of it, so I'm not going to sacrifice any length. We'll just have kind of this look for right now. Okay. So I think that's probably honestly one of the more complicated things to get figured out here. The rest of it's a little bit more straightforward. So that, after that, what we're going to do now is we're going to baste around, so that's step 2. Now we're going to baste the lining to the outer fabric in an effort to make the lining and the shell fabric or the outer fabric behave like one textile. Okay, so we don't have to worry about it anymore. And so to do that, I'm going to start with this gusset piece. I think what would be really nice is if I pressed this, right? So the iron's just barely yelling at me. But now my goal is to lay the lining out flat on the gusset and the 2 bag pieces here. So this is going to be, like I said, I don't think any of the lining has like a right side, wrong side. We're just going to lay these 2 on here. So on the wrong side of the fabric, here's my lining pieces. And the only trick to this is when you baste it together, just don't get any extra like little bubbles or anything built up in it. So maybe.
So are you doing wrong sides together?
I am. So my finished edges are what I see. And then I'm literally just going to baste it to make it behave like one textile. Okay, so these are basting stitches. I have no intention of ripping them out. I will just put them into the seam allowance area, and then the next seam that we sew will be a larger width than the basting stitches, and so it'll just suck up the basting stitches at that point. The reason I took the bobbin out is because I didn't have a bobbin thread on the top side anymore, so I just wondered if I had any bobbin thread left. And I think like for a lot of like the thread bunching that might be happening or experiencing, it will have a lot to do with where your threads are at. If the bobbin thread is on the top and pulled nicely underneath the foot, or if it accidentally gets like sucked down and causes like a big ball of mess on the inside. Okay, so to baste, I'm just gonna run, it's gonna be like the width of the presser foot, if not a little bit narrow. It doesn't have to be like super close to everything. We could make our stitch longer if we wanted, but I think we'll be okay. And so I'm just not even gonna back tack. The point of it is just to have these 2 textiles kind of be joined together. And just watch out for the tabs underneath here. So I don't have to worry about them being separate entities anymore. And the reason we can do this is because we're going to do a binding around the seam allowances. So we'll be able to just sandwich these 2 layers together, and then we'll put the binding around the outside edges of the raw edges of the 2 layers of fabric together. So that's why this method works for this, is because we are going to use a binding to finish the edges on the inside. But again, the only trick to this at this point is just to make sure you don't add like any unnecessary like fabric folds or bubbles on the inside here. Okay, so make sure they're nice and flat, and so when we push this back, it should just behave like one piece of fabric. Okay, I can pass this around while I work on these if you guys want to see it up close. We might need to change the needle. Okay, So the other thing that I want to point out is that these curves, like for like a simple bag, the curves probably weren't the best idea in the world. But they're better than like a sharp angle at this scale, I think. So as you're going around the curves, it's going to have to be a series of like, as you, I'm sure remember from 143, stop with the needle down, come forward a couple steps. I'm going to put the needle back down, lift the presser foot, rotate. So a couple stitches, like a couple, needle down, lift, rotate, couple stitches, needle down, lift, rotate until you clear that corner. And that is going to be needed on this is a pretty tight corner, to be honest. And so, and the scale of our bag is pretty tiny. So, yeah. All right. I'm going to change the needle, and I'm going to pass this one around as an example of why. With these lining fabrics, they're kind of temperamental, to be honest, and they show runs really bad if you do run them. So I'm going to pass this around, change the needle, and then start over again. And the reason I'm doing that is because on like the bottom edge here, see how it's all bunched up? Instead of like splitting the threads as it's sewing, it's punching through it and causing a run. So I'm just going to leave it for the moment, but I really don't want to fight with it for the rest of this project. So I think I'll just change out the needle. And this is where like, I have a love-hate relationship with lining fabrics because they do have a tendency to be kind of, I don't know, they're not very forgiving when it comes to runs and stuff. And I think it's because they're a lesser quality fabric personally, but. Okay. Yeah, let me pass the needle around. It's broken on the tip of it. You can see that it's like thrown on. So if you notice that when you're sewing, go ahead and change the needle out because it's just going to cause you some headache and not have like a very nice outcome. Cute. Oh yeah, yeah. It does look like there are some goodies in this drawer too, like, and Sarah had some extra needles in there. So just make sure if you use anything out of the drawer, it goes back in the drawer and doesn't make it into our kit, right? So that's kind of a problem. All right, so as you're putting the needle in, remember that there is kind of a groove on it, on the shaft of the needle. And so the groove will always, you'll want it to be, and the eye of the needle also aligns with that groove. You'll want it to be facing to the left-hand side, so out this way. So remember, the needle's going sideways. If you can see the eye of the needle straight ahead of you, then it's in wrong and needs to be rotated about 90 degrees. So let's just make sure all this works. There we go. There's number one. How about, since I'm pretty sure you guys know how the second one of these is going to go together, why doesn't everybody get your sandwiching together, and then if you have your machine set up, at least a few people can sew this 1/4 inch seam allowance if you have the sandwiches right, and then go ahead and feel free to baste if you've got the time. So you don't need to stand here and watch me do this. I can do this and call you back when I'm done. You could. It's not necessary. Yeah, either way, you could. Absolutely. So, yeah. Either way, I'll get you the same end result. I don't, but I have what about like a tiny bit?
Just, yeah, just wanted to make sure. I didn't know what
Yeah, you're welcome.
Is it okay if I watch you still?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm like, I already finished it actually.
Oh, you did the whole thing?
Yeah, I was like
Oh.
confused about the due date, so I like
Oh,
just
yeah.
knocked it out, but it's not the best. So I'm like, I just want to see exactly.
Will your computer die if I unplug this?
I'm at 16%. We should be fine, Sarah, until next time. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So maybe if you want, you could rip it out, and try it again. And then if you do end up ripping it out, I would say just trash the binding, and you just need another length of binding and do a new
I
binding.
know I messed up on the zipper a little bit. I didn't know if there were any marbles.
There are. I think they're upstairs in my office. So.
Yeah, I struggled on those corners.
Yeah, so the needle down, lift and pivot basically is.
Okay.
There you go. Much nicer. My machine at home is this exact machine. It's just automated, and so like it's hard for my brain to be like, wait, we're not stopping the needle down. And like I don't have to do that at my home machine.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I did it on my home machine too. I feel like that was hard too. I feel like probably these would have been easier.
Well, they have a better like pressure on the thing, to
Yeah.
hold it down for you.
Yeah, my needle kept breaking.
Oh, well, that's probably because you were trying to twist, and then the needle would hit the plate or something down there.
Yeah,
because
it was
wasn't
whenever
quite
it was
like
more
that.
like thicker, like a bunch of
Yeah.
stuff right there.
So,
Well, I didn't have one of these little yellow pieces, so I kind of like just made another one.
oh, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah. It's all optional. It's all.
Okay.
I think on like the one that we're replicating, that is like where they have the carabiner on the back of it to kind of. Oh, number 2. You can take that, Michaela, if you want.
Oh, I just needed to. You're just doing like almost like an eighth of an inch of the base, right?
Yeah. My seam allowance, like with that binding, will be like 1/4 of an inch.
Okay.
So.
There's definitely something.
What's happening? I would change your foot out first. Just use like a regular foot for the time being. Like if you had like interfacing, yeah. Well, I have lots of experience, but if you had interface, it's fusible. You could just fuse the two together. It's kind of easy part. So like right now, it's just I think easiest for everybody if we just get these into like one fabric, and then it's I think easier to kind of visualize what our goals are. And the bottom's going clockwise. Right? Is there position movement?
Like just because when I first tried to sew it, all got bunched up. I got all the
You don't have a regular one? I feel like it's not feeding it through. So there's a couple things we can do. I bet it would have clipped in all the way on that one.
Yeah, well, and like, look at it more times and like make sure that there is
All right, when you're at a stopping point, go ahead and head back over. Okay, so let's work on, now we're on, I think, step 4. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to connect this piece right here to the back piece. And I know this is a back piece because it's got the little tab on it, all right? So I don't know if I have like a good, it says find the center of the outer gusset part, align this with the bottom right edge of the back piece. And so what that means is I'm going to use a pen, a pencil, or even a scissor to kind of find the center mark of this piece right here. So I'm just going to fold it in half like you've seen me do. And you can use a little bit of pencil to mark it. I'm choosing to do that because we only have like a 1/4 inch seam allowances. So if I snipped it, I would maybe go beyond that. And then on my back piece, this center mark is going to get centered like on the center part of the bottom right corner, I believe it says. So if you wanted to, you could likewise, because these are squares, you could fold this in half too and give yourself a little tick mark here to have some place to start with, right? So that those two things can line up. And then for this part, it is going to be sewn right sides together. So let me find my mark here one more time so I can see it. All right, so it's going to go together like this, but I see right here that I have a raw edge. And as soon as I sew over this raw edge, it's going to be impossible for me to clean finish it after it's sewn into a seam. So when you're working on anything like garments or bags or whatever you're doing, always be mindful of like where your raw edges are, and if they're going to be now sewn into something else, we'll never be able to get back and nicely finish this edge once it's connected to another seam, right? So at this point, what we're going to do is you're going to take a little bit of your, just like a little 1.5 or whatever of your ribbon, and you can sew it down, but honestly, you don't need to sew it down. We I'm just going to fold it over the edge of this raw edge, and then I'll catch it multiple times when I sew it. So I'm just going to take a little bit of ribbon. Let's do sew it. What the hell? You know, just so we don't have to worry about it. So you can press it in half, hamburger, hot dog way. And so it sticks on there. And we're going to conceal this seam. So this is how the binding's going to go on too, just like this, only a little more complicated because we're working in a three-dimensional thing. Right now, we're just working on like a little edge covering. And at this point, I might actually, because my binding is black, I would consider actually changing my, after I sew these parts together, anything that has to do with the binding, I do want to match my binding color and my thread color because it helps me conceal like my ugly seams and stuff. And so when it's contrasting like this, it looks a little funky to me. So match the binding thread color if you can. Okay, so now that that's done, we can go ahead and use our tick marks to line up our back panel and our gusset. And I'm going to pin these two together right at the corners. So they're just lined up with my notches. And for the moment, I'm just going to let that lie. What we're going to do is we're going to sew. I'm going to start sewing, and I do this actually with a lot of my projects. I'm going to start sewing maybe from this corner right here and work my way around this side. And then once I think that's the wrong corner. Yeah, I think I need to rotate this. And then once I get to basically an inch or so away from the end here, I'm going to stop, and then I'll take it off the machine, and then I'll sew this bit. Once I'm about an inch away or so, I'm going to sew these two edges together and then finish my seam. Okay, but what I think, let me just double check. Bottom right edge. I think it needs to be bottom left edge of my instructions, because if we do this, my zipper opening will be down here on the bottom, which doesn't make any sense. So if I do it here, my zipper opening will be at the top and I'll wrap over. So I think the instructions, or maybe how I set up today, is a little bit different than when I did the instructions. I think you'll want your top edge of your zipper to be at the top edge of the bag. So regardless if it's right or left, go ahead and make the decision of where you want that zipper, where you want your gusset positioned. So if that's the case, we'll just do this one more time. Make sure the zipper is across the top of your bag. Okay. So that seems to work. So right sides are together. I can see my linings. And so at this point, I'm going to put it on the machine like this. And I'm going to come forward. I'm going to go all the way around the zipper just like this. And then I'll stop and I'll do this last part last. So I can like kind of work away from that starting point. And I do that so I don't shift things around. So it's pinned right here. If I start right here, it won't shift back or forth when I'm sewing. That's just a trick that you can use. So now we're going to line it up with the quarter inch mark on the machine. And when we go around these corners, you have to grade your seam allowance, okay? So grading the seam allowance is just a fancy term for saying that you're going to have to snip the fabric in order to open it up enough in order for it to make the curve and not lose any length. So these zippers and gussets are set up where they're just about the right size, and we don't have a lot of wiggle room. So we need to not lose any extra fabric. And so I'm going to start my with a back stitch right there, and I'm going to go with my needle down. This is my first corner. I'm going to take my scissors or snips, And I'm actually going to snip, and this is where the basting stitch actually can be your guide, right? So snip to the basting stitch, but not through the basting stitch. And I'm gonna do a series of like maybe like 3 of them, like 1, 2, 3. And what this is doing is it opens up, I can now kind of pull the top rectangle piece. And I don't know if anybody, do you guys know this technique? Is this something that you know already? So if you look here, you can kind of see that it's opening up. Like we have little pizza triangle wedges that are opening up, and that's allowing the fabric to expand to go around that corner nicely. Again, this project for being like a simple bag, quote unquote, is actually kind of complicated because of these tight corners. So when you're on the straight part, you can just go through it, right? Like no big deal. And when you get to the part with the tabs, just make sure that the tabs are not getting stuck in that seam. So that's one thing you have to be mindful of down here is where's this tab at the moment. And so you just have to kind of be mindful that you're not getting that pulled into the seam. If you do, you can just rip that section of seam, undo it, and sew over the top of that seam, and you're good to go. Okay. So I'm coming up to that next corner. Here's my binding. I think I do want my binding to be folded this way, just so I don't see it as much. I'm going to do a couple stitches, stop with the needle down, pivot, stitch, needle down, and now with my, now I'm moving on to the zipper tape. So the same thing applies with the zipper tape around the corners. It's a woven fabric. So at this point, what it's doing is it's trying to like pull away from that edge, so you have a little bit of kink that you can see. So if you stop the needle down, open up, lift up your presser foot, snip it, now I'm going to be able to keep my black zipper tape aligned to my pink edge, no problem. Okay, so you have to snip that in order to make sure that you can kind of get around these corners.
Are you snipping just the top layer or one layer?
I'm just snipping the top layer. So in this scenario, I want the gusset and or the zipper tape to be the one that's opening up. And so I just snip the whatever piece you want opened. Yeah. So I basically do like 3 stitches, stop with the needle down, rotate, snip if you need more snips. Okay, and I think I'm just going to back tack, and that's going to be like my first pass at it. I'm going to take it off the machine, and now I'm going to do this edge right here. I'm going to sew this to here about 1 inch away and stop, take it off the machine, and sew a 1/4 to 1/2 inch, whatever I need in order for it to fit around that curve, right? So you might have some variability in how big of a seam you can do at the end here because of how well you snipped and let this piece expand to go around the corners. If you get to the end here and you don't have anything that you can sew, it's because these weren't snipped and like gone around those corners. It wasn't like shaped around the corners, eased into those corners as enough, and it needs a little bit more. So now I'm going to sew. So up to this point, I was sewing where I could see the gusset up, which I think is helpful. I took it off the machine, so now I can do this corner right here, and so I have to flip it over, right? Just going to back stitch so I know it's permanent. Okay, so now I'm right here at the corner. And so there will be a little bit of variability here on your seams. And I mean, to be honest, it might take a little trial and error. I don't know. I think I can probably do like 1/4 of an inch and still have enough to clear. Oh, I think I can do 1/2 an inch actually. So I'm gonna I'll show this side too. Like I'm gonna bend the tape around here and see how much I folded over right there. I think I can do 1/2 an inch, which is actually good for this bottom stop. So I'm kind of just molding it around that corner and see how much is folded up right here. And my fingernails right there. So there's about 1/2 inch there. So I think I'm gonna try to do 1/2 inch. It will become abundantly clear if you didn't give yourself enough space. And so what that means is just seam ripping a little bit, undoing this and giving a little, taking a little smaller of a bite. Okay. So anybody that has these style of zippers, you have to be really careful of this big bottom stopper. This is a separating zipper, which isn't ideal for this, but they had fun colors, so we're gonna go with it. So what I recommend you do, if you have the big yellow or blue zippers, you don't have to worry about this part. What I recommend you do is I'm gonna sew like on the zipper tape here, and then I'm gonna stop and skip those teeth, and I'm gonna sew on the other half of the zipper tape. So there's gonna be 2 short stitches, just so I don't run into those teeth at all. And so again, if we were doing this in production, we would have the correct zipper. So I'm getting pretty close. So it's almost like 2 back tacks, to be honest. I think I'll sew it like this. So now the question is am I good on my length? You know, like, I don't know. So now I'm going to try to finish off my seam. But again, we're at this kind of juncture where if I sew this directly into this seam and I sew over this, I'm never going to be able to get back to this and cover it up, right? So at this point right here, what you'd want to do is go ahead and take another bit of binding, put it over the edge, and either sew it in place you can, like the stop is going to be a problem, or just pin it in place or whatnot, because we're going to catch it in this seam. We're going to catch it in the seam too. So that's kind of up to you, however you want to do it. But at this point, we need to do something to conceal that raw edge. Maybe what we should do, for those of you that have the longer zippers, it doesn't matter because you don't have this big, thick stop. For the rest of us, because we have this and it might be utterly impossible to put it over the whole thing, like it just look junky, let's sandwich it between the zipper, end of the zipper stump, and the raw edge of the gusset and the lining. So sandwich it over this and clear that. If you have a long zipper, it doesn't matter. Here, I'll still have like nice finished edges without having to clear that. There's no way to clear that in like a nice way. So if you wanted, we could baste it just for good measure. Okay, so now I know it's not going to go anywhere, and I will catch those stitches in my next step, which will be my binding, so that should all be concealed. Okay, so let's finish up the seam right here. So this is probably, of this whole operation, one of the more complicated parts of this. And again, I will need to snip my zipper tape, so the gusset, the square piece, in order to be able to go around that curve. And in this case, I just have a lot of thread going on here. I think for this, it feels most natural to have the flat kind of gusset part, or I'm sorry, have the flat like back touching the sewing machine here. And so I can see what's going on up here. Whenever I sew, it's like, what is the most complicated thing that I'm trying? I want to be able to see it. So position it on the machine so you can see, like, this is definitely way more complicated than just a flat rectangle that we've got here. So I'm going to snip just a few to get me started. Making sure my raw edges are lined up, right? Like that's the end goal, so we don't lose any fabric or change our dimensions of anything. Get over here and I'm going to basically fold my binding the way I want it to be.